I caught the eye of the richest man, becoming his 10th girlfriend. Everyone online was guessing when I would be dumped. But a month later, a video of the richest man crying and calling me his wife was leaked online. I trended on the hot search. Everyone was waiting to see me make a fool of myself because today was the day Ronald, the richest man, was going to dump me. It's well known that Ronald's relationships never last more than 7 days. And today was my 7th day with him. Waiting for Christina to be dumped. They say she deserves it with her body and looks. When I heard these comments, I jokingly nudged the man beside me, raising an eyebrow. "Heard you're breaking up with me?" But before he could respond, I felt a sudden pull at my waist. Ronald, with his mesmerizing eyes, looked at me and smiled gently. "What, don't want me anymore?" His deep, magnetic voice echoed in my ear. I looked up, and there was Ronald's bewitching face right before me. In an instant, I recalled the online comments about Ronald: handsome, wealthy, domineering, heartless. They said he had never truly loved anyone, and every woman by his side was just a pastime. But he was also generous, giving $1 million breakup fee each time. I wouldn't mind that million. Tonight, there was a surprise at the banquet. Ronald smiled, handing me a gilded invitation. I looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "Surprise?" Ronald smirked. "A big surprise." Looking at the invitation in his hands and back at him, I wondered, was it a breakup party? Did that mean my million was on its way? Ronald's party included elites from high society. I wore the black dress he prepared, and as I turned around, I faced his ex, Sunny. The spotlight was on Ronald's current girlfriend and his ex. All eyes were on us. Christina meets Sunny. This'll be interesting. Are they going to fight? But they were all disappointed. In the next second, Sunny excitedly hugged me. "Christina, congratulations on getting rich." I patted her shoulder, smiling brightly. "Thank you. I am indeed getting rich." I was a bit excited at the thought of getting $1 million tonight. The others at the banquet were stunned, watching us hug without a fight. They didn't know I was already friends with Ronald's 9 exes, and we even had a group chat called the Exes Alliance. Tonight, the group chat was lively with well wishes for my newfound wealth and freedom from being a stand-in. I smiled. Ronald had a secret about his beloved. I once saw a portrait in Ronald's study, a girl who looked around 15 but strikingly beautiful. Ronald cherished that painting, never allowing anyone else near it. His previous girlfriends had never seen it. The first time I saw it, I was surprised not by her beauty but by how much she resembled me. We shared even the tear mole at the corner of our eyes. But I knew I wasn't her. I realized that all of Ronald's girlfriends had some similarities with this girl, but I resembled her the most. Ronald often praised my beauty and looks, but I wasn't naive. He often stared wistfully at the tear mole in my eye until I discovered the painting. It was through me that he was searching for someone else's shadow. But after today, I wouldn't be a stand-in anymore. I was always obedient, and Ronald was always generous. I had already thought about how to distribute that $1 million. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the entrance. A woman in a white dress walked in. Bella had arrived. Bella was back from her studies, now a rival in the socialite circle. Bella and Ronald were a perfect match. No one noticed that Bella and I looked very similar. As the whispers began, all eyes turned to me. I smiled and met Bella's curious gaze. Bella, who's 70% like me. Could Christina be Bella's stand-in? Someone in the hall suddenly screamed, causing a commotion. Ronald noticed Christina because of Bella. How dare this imposter Christina show up in front of the real thing? Today was specifically for Bella's return, and Christina was a joke here. I heard sneers and mocking looks from everyone. Sunny stomped her foot angrily. They are too much. I smiled and patted her shoulder to reassure her, "It's okay. I'm just wondering if I'll get my $1 million." I couldn't care less. Bella, dressed in white, stood behind me, her eyes filled with curiosity and a tinge of hostility. Bella, why bother with her? Exactly, how could such a despicable person like her even talk to you? Standing on both sides of Bella, the women tried hard to please her and belittle me. Christina, leave Ronald quickly. A woman like you doesn't deserve Ronald at all. Bella just stood there, allowing them to insult me freely as if it was all normal. I lowered my head and smiled lightly. I don't deserve Ronald, but do you? Bella frowned slightly, surprised that I spoke up. The two cronies beside her were red-faced from being challenged. Of course, only a talented woman like Bella is worthy of someone like Ronald. Bella has studied abroad at a top university and is coveted by major companies. You, on the other hand, are just a cheap imitation of Bella, completely incomparable. Upon hearing those words, Bella's displeasure slowly dissipated. She glanced at me indifferently and said, "One should have self-awareness." Self-awareness? I chuckled, mocking the situation. Bella's companion couldn't hold back and raised her hand, attempting to slap me. Bella didn't intervene, just coldly watching. I stared back, grabbed her wrist, and asked coldly, "What gives you the right to hit me? You witch, let go of me." Bella's friend cried out in pain, looking at me with a pale face. I sneered, "Do you have the audacity to call me a crony?" She froze, her face turning white as she stared at me, speechless. Bella and the others seemed shocked that I dared to resist. They looked at me with disbelief, especially Bella. Her expression turned cold as she re-evaluated me with icy eyes. I glanced at her, giving a cold smile. I believe in not bothering others if they don't bother me. But if someone picks a fight, I won't back down. Christina, release her, and I'll have her apologize to you, Bella spoke coldly. Bella's friend looked shocked at Bella. I don't want my welcoming banquet ruined. Bella glanced at her, a hint of warning in her eyes. The woman reluctantly apologized, "I'm sorry," her voice barely audible. I smirked. Bella's welcoming banquet? Ronald had instructed me to dress up for tonight's party to surprise me. Is this his idea of a surprise? As Ronald entered the room, everyone's gaze turned towards him. Ronald's here. All eyes focused on the man in the impeccably tailored black suit. Ronald must be here to see Bella. This was, after all, a welcoming banquet organized by Ronald for Bella, so it was natural for him to be looking for Bella. Yes, how long can Christina keep acting smug? She'll be dumped soon, right? Bella's eyes lit up with joy and embarrassment at Ronald's arrival. People congratulated her while also looking down on me. I lazily looked at Ronald, who usually lounged at home in casual wear, leaning on my shoulder like a lazy cat. It was the first time I had seen him dressed so formally. As Ronald approached, Bella's smile grew wider. I smiled faintly, planning to leave. Suddenly, I felt a tightness around my waist and a deep, magnetic voice whispered in my ear, "My Christina, where do you think you're going?" I looked up to find Ronald's captivating face inches away, his lips curved into a smile. "So naughty, I told you to wait for me at the party, didn't I?" Ronald, without hesitation, pulled me into his embrace, his voice tender. I glanced at Bella behind him, her face ashen, and smiled, hooking my hand around his neck. "It's boring without you." Ronald smiled, affectionately scratching my nose. "All right, I'll stay with you." Everyone watched in astonishment. Weren't they saying that Ronald was going to dump Christina tonight? Isn't Ronald supposed to be breaking up with Christina tonight? This doesn't look like it at all. Isn't Christina just a stand-in for Bella? And isn't this party organized by Ronald for Bella? People murmured before turning their attention to Bella. Confidently, Bella walked up to Ronald. "Ronald, I'm back." She smiled elegantly, showcasing her grace. Ronald, still holding me, casually turned to face her, giving her a lazy acknowledgement. It seemed very dismissive. Bella's smile froze for a moment. She clenched her fists but maintained her smile. "Ronald, thank you for hosting this welcome banquet for me," she said, then shot me a triumphant look. It was as if she was saying, "See, you're just a stand-in. I'm the main one." "Who said this was for you?" A low, chilling voice echoed in the hall. Everyone gasped. Ronald's eyes were cold as he glanced at Bella, full of warning. Bella's pupils contracted, her smile faltering. "Ronald. But Ronald didn't even spare her a glance. He continued, holding me and addressing everyone. Welcome, everyone, to celebrate the 1-week anniversary of meeting Christina and me. Allow me to introduce my girlfriend, Christina. He lowered his head to look at me warmly. I was taken aback. I didn't expect this from Ronald. So, was this party actually for me? Everyone present looked at each other. What's going on? Ronald not only didn't break up with Christina, but also publicly announced her girlfriend status? That's not right. Ronald has never had a girlfriend for more than 7 days. Bella must be so embarrassed, claiming this was her welcome banquet, but it was clearly held for Christina. Bella's face turned pale, filled with disbelief. She bit her lip tightly, looking sadly at Ronald. Ronald didn't even spare a glance at her. He just turned to me and said with a slight smirk, "Girlfriend, care to dance?" I glanced at Bella standing behind him. I met her gaze filled with hostility. I raised an eyebrow and lightly said, "Sure." Bella and her entourage stood awkwardly in the banquet hall, unsure of what to do. Ronald hugged me a bit tighter and with a hint of grievance in his tone, he asked, "Are they more attractive than me?" I smiled, put my arms around him and reassured, "Of course not." Ronald finally showed a satisfied smile and whispered in my ear, "So, girlfriend, are you happy with this surprise?" I hesitated. Surprise, huh? To be honest, I still feel a little heartbroken about my 10 million. But still, it's pretty satisfying to show up Bella and her crew. I smiled and lightly kissed his cheek, saying, "Very satisfied, extremely satisfied." Ronald's eyes tightened slightly, and he smiled, embracing me. "Ronald, are you still blaming me for leaving without saying goodbye back then? So you deliberately found her to provoke me, right?" Suddenly, a voice filled with deep sorrow came from behind. Ronald frowned unhappily, coldly scanned behind him. He saw Bella, biting her lip tightly, looking at him with sorrow and anger. I raised an eyebrow at Ronald. Should I leave? But Ronald held me even tighter, saying, "No need." Bella's face turned deathly pale. She probably didn't expect that, even when she lost face, Ronald wouldn't give her any face. "Ronald, Bella, it's interesting to see you both here," a soft female voice suddenly sounded from behind. I looked up to see a middle-aged woman who bore a striking resemblance to Bella, standing elegantly behind her. Her gaze was fixed on me. "Bella." Bella saw her and instantly looked full of grievances, and then she threw herself into her arms. The woman held her, a hint of tenderness flashing in her eyes. I lazily glanced at them. Lily, Bella's mother. The legendary iron-willed female tycoon in the business world. Is she here to support her daughter personally? Lily patted Bella's back, then looked at Ronald with a smile. "Ronald, Bella is ignorant. She has caused you trouble." Ronald glanced at Bella in her arms and said bluntly, "Indeed, it has caused trouble for my girlfriend. Please take care of her properly, Auntie." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present looked at each other. Even Lily was stunned. Bella's eyes were red and full of tears. Lily quickly reacted, looking at me and Ronald, smiling. "So, this is Ronald's girlfriend? Bella has been offensive to you before. I apologize on her behalf." Her polite words made it difficult to find fault. I smiled lightly. However, children need to be disciplined. Parents cannot protect them forever, right? I looked deeply into her eyes. Lily paused for a moment, then looked me over and suddenly smiled. "Christina is right, I will discipline her well." Bella, now angry, glared at me, wanting to say something but was stopped by Lily. She looked at me and Ronald, nodded to us, then took Bella away. Ronald looked down at me and said, "Christina, does that make you feel better?" I looked up, met his eyes, and smiled slowly. It was satisfying, but the thought of my 10 million floating away still stung a bit. It was no surprise that I was back on the hot search list again. The related topics were trending at the top. Messages in the X-Relationship Alliance group kept flashing. "Christina, you are amazing. Christina, you actually conquered Ronald. You are my idol." Sunny said, "You guys don't know how powerful Christina was when she showed up." Bella, She really made us proud. I rubbed my forehead and replied in the group, but I lost my 10 million. Sunny said, think long term, the richest man will still need your 10 million. Ex-relationship alliance? A magnetic voice suddenly sounded in my ear. My hand holding the phone trembled slightly, and as I looked up, I met Ronald's ambiguous gaze. I blinked, trying to find an excuse. A hand with distinct knuckles suddenly handed me a bank card. I was stunned and asked, this is? Ronald smiled and teased, a gift for our 1-week anniversary, 3 million inside. My eyes lit up. 3 million. The richest man truly lived up to his title. So generous. You don't want it? Ronald raised the card and raised his eyebrows at me. Wanting this is a sign of respect for the 3 million. I immediately took the bank card from his hand, my smile beaming. Ronald then embraced me lazily, leaning against my shoulder, and said, greedy for money. I looked down at the bank card and murmured softly, for many people, this could save their lives. Looking up at him, I hooked my arm around his neck and smiled, don't you like the money-hungry me? Ronald's eyes flickered, and he pulled me tightly into his arms. As long as it's you, no matter what, I like you, his voice, deep and slow, whispered into my ear. My body trembled slightly, I smiled, and held him tighter. Lily invited me. She wanted to have dinner with just me. Ronald glanced at me and asked, do you really not need me to go in with you? I linked my arm with his and raised an eyebrow, worried I'll get picked on. Ronald looked at me, smiled suddenly, reached out and gently touched my head, I'm here, feel free to do whatever you want. I tiptoed, lightly kissed his face, and smiled softly, I'm going in. Ronald watched me and nodded. I pushed open the door to the private room, where only Lily was sitting. She stood up elegantly in luxurious attire and smiled at me, Christina, thank you for accepting my invitation. I lazily sat down, smiled charmingly at her. How could I dare not to come to Lily's invitation? She paused slightly, her smile still on her face, and sat down slowly. Christina, you look a lot like someone I know, she said, looking at me as if trying to find some trace on my face. I lowered my head and smiled, just someone you know? I said, lazily raising my gaze, looking at her with cold eyes. Lily's pupils slightly shrank, and her smile couldn't be maintained. You, are you really Mary? Mary, I laughed. It's been a long time since I heard that name. So long, I almost forgot that I used to be called Mary. Lily's expression changed drastically, murmuring to herself, I should have known since the moment I saw you. How could someone who looks exactly like me be someone else? She stared at me blankly. Mary. Sorry, Lily, I am called Christina. I smiled at her, emotionless. Mary, I am your mother. She looked at me sadly, do you still hate me, right? I smiled lightly and said, Lily, daughters can't be switched. Lily's body trembled slightly, her face full of sadness. Mary, Mom had no choice back then. No choice? I coldly smiled. Is it because my existence hindered you from marrying into a wealthy family? So you tried everything to get rid of me, even watching me being abducted by traffickers, right? I looked at her coldly, word by word. Lily's pupils suddenly shrank, looking at me in horror. You knew it all? I laughed, tears almost came out with my smile. How could I not know? When I was abducted by traffickers, I saw Lily hiding around the corner. She just watched me being taken away, indifferent. From that moment, the mother-daughter relationship between Lily and I was severed. While I was being starved and beaten, suffering in a dark and miserable cellar. And Lily? She was wearing a wedding dress, marrying into a wealthy household, and becoming the lady of the manor. How could I ever forgive her? Mary, I did try to find you that year. The moment you were taken by traffickers, I regretted it. I called the police, I really did, but they couldn't find you. Lily covered her face in pain. I sneered, and then you happily married into a wealthy family, becoming a rich man's wife, right? You know, when they forced me to beg on the street, all the media were congratulating you on giving birth to a little princess. Is that what you call regret? I stared at her with cold eyes. Lily's lip trembled, but she couldn't say a word. She bit her lip in sorrow and finally took out a bank card from her bag. Mary, I know I've wronged you, this is 10 million. I coldly glanced at the bank card in her hand and smiled. You're really generous. What, is this 10 million hush money? Lily trembled slightly. No. She held onto the bank card tightly. After a long time, she slowly spoke. Mary, Bella is your sister, she likes Ronald. I smiled. So it's not hush money. It's a reward for me to leave Ronald, isn't it? I smiled and took the bank card from her. I'll take the money. But, I won't leave Ronald. This money is a debt you owe. I stared coldly at her, then saw the panic in her eyes. I smiled, turned around, and left. The debt she owed was far from being paid off. As I stepped outside, I saw Ronald's tall figure. He strides towards me and pulls me into his arms. Let's go home. His low, magnetic voice rang in my ears. His big hand wrapped tightly around mine. The warmth from his palm made me feel warm. I smiled slowly and let him lead me. Back at home, Ronald watched me without moving an inch, as if fearing I would do something rash. I smiled and took the initiative to tease, "What's wrong, no work today?" Ronald looked at me, raised an eyebrow and jokingly said, "If I had to go to work every day, why would I be paying so many people high salaries, to do charity?" I burst out laughing. That makes sense. Why don't you donate this money from the card? I handed him the bank card I got from Lily. Ronald took it and looked at me. Donate it? I casually glanced at the bank card. Dirty. Ronald chuckled softly. Fine. I looked at him, paused, and slowly said, "Don't you want to ask me about it?" Ronald softly rubbed my head and said gently, "When you want to tell me, you'll naturally do so." I was stunned, smiled suddenly, and hugged him gently. How did I deserve to meet such a good Ronald? That night, I received several threatening text messages on my phone. Christina, you're not worthy of Ronald. If you don't leave Ronald, you won't be able to bear the consequences. I looked at the messages, smiled. Can't bear the consequences, huh? To be honest, I'm quite looking forward to seeing that. Ronald pulled me into his arms, raised an eyebrow. Why are you so happy? I put away my phone, raised an eyebrow at him. I'll show you a great performance later. Ronald paused. Don't be too harsh. I glanced at him, afraid I'll hurt your dear baby? Ronald scowled and tapped my nose. I'm afraid you'd hurt your own hand. I laughed and hugged him. The next day, while shopping, I was surrounded by a few men on the street corner. They looked at me mockingly. Perhaps they were admiring me because even the richest man was captivated by me. I lazily glanced at them, smiled. Should I thank you for the compliments? The leader of the men paused, smiled. You're quite interesting. It's a pity someone asked me to teach you a lesson, otherwise I would have a hard time doing so. I lowered my eyes and gave a slight smile. Before you teach me a lesson, can you tell me who ordered you to do this? The man squinted slightly and was about to speak. Christina, you truly are despicable, going after any man you can get. A mocking voice suddenly rang out. I looked up and saw Bella walking slowly towards me, wearing a disdainful expression on her face. Christina, didn't I warn you to stay away from Ronald? You didn't listen, so don't blame me. She walked up to me, full of mockery. I glanced at her lazily and suddenly smiled. What are you laughing at? Bella's eyes narrowed, looking slightly annoyed. At this moment, she was full of jealousy, far from looking like a refined lady. I lazily looked at her and said coldly, Bella, did you think the things you did would never be found out? Bella looked at me puzzled. I stared at her coldly and said, word by word, a year ago, at the intersection, you hit a woman. How did you know? Bella's pupils suddenly contracted. I chuckled. If you don't want anyone to know, don't do it. Did you think you could escape consequences by fleeing abroad? Or did you think your family could cover up everything for you? You should accept the punishment for the crime you committed. Bella's eyes trembled slightly as she stared at me. How do you know? Looking at her coldly, I said, the woman you hit was my mother. She kindly adopted me after I escaped from human traffickers. She was so kind and gentle, but Bella turned her into a vegetable. And this mastermind, Bella, is walking free, escaped abroad, becoming the darling of society. Suddenly, Bella laughed recklessly. So it's your despicable mother. Indeed, despicable people and their despicable mothers are so detestable. What does it matter if you know the truth? What can you do to me? And do you think after today, Ronald will still want you? She sneered and signaled to the men behind her. The men slowly approached me, and I raised my eyes, looked at Bella, and smiled. Congratulations, Bella, you've become the shame of the entire elite circle. I raised my phone. Bella looked at my phone and suddenly froze. You despicable person, what have you done? I coldly smiled. I broadcasted your crimes to the world. Yes, I went live. Bella didn't know that by admitting her crimes just now, it had been seen by everyone online. Now, it must have been trending as #1. Bella furiously said, You despicable person, even if we go to hell, I will make sure to take you with me. If you want money, then bring it on. She shouted fiercely to the men behind her. The men hesitated, then quickly walked towards me. Christina, you're finished. Everyone online will see you being humiliated. What will Ronald say? Bella said triumphantly, but suddenly stopped in her tracks. How is this possible? The men who were just arrogant moments ago were now writhing in pain on the ground. I lazily withdrew my leg, clapped my hands. It's been a while since I last fought, so it's a bit rusty. Bella looked at me in horror. How is this possible? How can you? I lowered my eyes and smiled. Did Bella think I was some fragile woman? Sorry. How could someone who escaped from human traffickers be useless? Plus, I've been practicing Taekwondo for years. These men Bella brought, I didn't even find them worthy. Sirens from police cars sounded in the distance, and soon several police officers rushed over, restraining Bella and the men on the ground. Bella stared at me like a madwoman. Christina, wait for me. When I get out, I will never let you off. I laughed. Loudly. Did Bella naively think her family could save her? Unfortunately. They probably won't even have time to save themselves now. I picked up the phone from the ground, opened the news page, and handed it to her. Bella looked down, her pupils contracting, showing disbelief on her face. How can this be? How can I be bankrupt? I looked at her coldly. Did she really think that the things she and her family did would never be revealed? Their family's wealth was built on some shady businesses. Over the years, how many families have they destroyed? Did they really think they would not face consequences? I glanced at Bella, giving her a cold smile. Bella, you're right about one thing. Bitches and their moms are equally annoying. Bella shivered slightly and looked at me, bewildered. Ignoring her, I looked at the person standing behind her. Lily stood there pale-faced, and Bella turned around, calling out in relief as she saw Lily. Mom, help me. Lily just looked at me with a sorrowful expression. Mary, is this what you wanted? Sisters fighting, family torn apart? What sisters, what family? Mom, what are you talking about? Bella was completely baffled. Lily glanced at her, sighing deeply. Bella, you and her, you're sisters. What? Bella was shocked. I shot Lily a cold look. You're wrong. My mom only has me. And because of your precious daughter, my mom is still in the hospital unconscious. Lily trembled slightly, unable to say a word. I walked past her toward the figure waiting on the street corner. Ronald stood there, smiling faintly as he embraced me and whispered, You did well. It's all over. I raised my hand and hugged him back. Yeah, it's over. Bella and her family were all sent to prison. Once a darling in high society, Bella had now fallen from grace, becoming the public enemy online. I put down my phone and turned to the person lying in the hospital bed, whispering, Mom, I've avenged you. Please wake up. But my mom just lay there silently, showing no response. I sighed, Feeling like I had let Bella off too easily, a warm hand gently rested on my shoulder, a magnetic voice saying, "Don't worry, I've arranged for the best doctor to treat Auntie. She will wake up." I turned to see Ronald, looking at me affectionately. I smiled, asking him how he knew I was there. I had never told Ronald about my background or my mom's situation. But he seemed to know everything. Ronald held my hand, lowering his gaze and said, "I'm afraid you'll leave. I'm afraid you'll finish what you came to do and then disappear from my world, never to be seen again. Christina, I'm afraid you'll leave me." Ronald wrapped his arm around my waist, looking deeply into my eyes. "Will you leave?" I hesitated for a moment. I had thought about leaving after dealing with Bella, but now, as I looked at him, I smiled and asked, "Ronald, are you confessing your feelings now?" Ronald's eyes lit up, filled with anticipation as he looked at me. "If I confess, will you stay?" I smiled softly. "Yes." Ronald's eyes narrowed slightly as he took a box from his pocket. Opening it gently, inside lay an exquisite ring. "Christina, will you marry me?" Ronald looked at me with deep affection, his eyes filled with hope. I looked at him teasingly, asking if he was worried I might take all his money. "If you're after money, that's not a problem. I have plenty, and you can have as much as you want. All my money is yours, just as I am yours." Ronald's eyes sparkled as he embraced me tightly. "So, Christina, will you marry me?" I whispered my answer in his ear, "I will." Ronald's body trembled slightly, and then he hugged me tightly. "I've finally caught my favorite star." I laughed. "And I've found the person I want to spend my life with. Who also happens to be a billionaire. Looks like I hit the jackpot." A week later, the billionaire's wedding took place, lasting for 3 days and nights. He said he wanted everyone to know that he had married the girl he loved the most. Later, I found out that Sunny and the others were not Ronald's girlfriends, but rather beneficiaries of his support. On the 7th day of marriage, my mom woke up. The doctor called it a medical miracle, but I knew it was the result of my mom's good deeds. A month later, I came out of the examination room, and Ronald ran over nervously. "Honey, how did it go?" I glanced at him and pointed to my belly, saying, "The doctor said no intimacy for a while." Ronald's eyes lit up, then dimmed. He looked at my belly with a touch of disappointment. "Honey, am I out of favor?" I rolled my eyes at him, and he followed beside me, carrying my bag, carefully walking beside me. "Honey, walk slowly." Later, the video where the billionaire Ronald cried and begged me was leaked online. The whole internet was buzzing with the news. The billionaire Ronald was afraid of his wife. Ronald's epilogue: I like a girl. She was the light of my 14 years old. Back then, I was abducted by human traffickers and beaten in a dark cellar. I thought I would die there, but in the darkness, a pair of small hands held on to me and said, "Don't be afraid, hold on." A tender voice sounded in my ear. I looked up and saw a young, wounded face with a faint smile. She told me, living is more important than anything else. It was strange. I was about to give up at that moment, but hearing her voice gave me the strength to keep going. She was beautiful, especially the teardrop mole at the corner of her eye, so charming and lovely. She was intelligent and strong. She led everyone, confronting the traffickers. Later, she found a suitable opportunity for us and led us all to escape. I was saved. But when I tried to find her, she was nowhere to be found. I asked for her name. She looked at the stars in the night sky and smiled at me. "Call me Christina." Christina. Christina, the symbol of hope. But I lost her. I've been searching for her, but there has been no news of her. They say I had 9 girlfriends, each lasting no more than a week. But they don't know. Those 9 girls were all victims abducted by traffickers. I looked for them just to find out where Christina went. Later at a banquet, I saw Bella, who looked 7/10 like her. Bella always clung to me. But I knew she wasn't her. Why did she look so much like Christina? I had my people investigate and found out that Bella's mother Lily had a daughter before, who was kidnapped by traffickers. I was heartbroken. My Christina suffered so much. Later, I saw Christina again in the hospital. I was overjoyed. But Christina at that time was full of sadness. I found out that her foster mother was left in a vegetative state after being hit by a car, and Bella was the culprit. Bella was sent out of the country overnight. I knew Christina wouldn't let it go so easily. So, I decided to help her. She definitely wanted to see Bella's downfall with her own eyes. I approached her. "Would you like to be my girlfriend?" Christina looked at me and smiled. "Sure, being the girlfriend of a wealthy man, you won't mistreat me, right?" I knew she was getting close to me to avenge her mother, but I was overjoyed. I also knew she didn't recognize me. I deliberately let her see the portrait in the study. She stared at the portrait blankly, silent for a long time. I thought she must have recognized me. We never spoke about it, but we both knew. She asked me if I would like a greedy her. How could I not like her? As long as it's her, no matter what she is like, I like her. I was actually afraid that once Christina got her revenge, she would leave. But she agreed to my proposal. I finally caught the star I liked the most. "Christina, I am so glad to meet you. You gave me the courage to want to live, and I hope to bring you all the happiness in your remaining years."